I'm going to call us to order. This is a special meeting of the Salem Keizer School Board on May 30th, 2017 at 6 p.m. at Support Services Center, Room 2, 2575 Commercial Street Southeast, Salem, Oregon. The meeting is called tonight to have first readings of a number of things, the bond staff recommendation, as well as revisions to board policy. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Christy, can you call the roll, please?
Nancy McMorris Audix.
Here.
Paul Kylo.
Here.
Chris Brantley is not with us this evening. Marty Hayen is not with us either this evening. Jim Green.
Here.
Rick Kimball.
Here.
Chuck Lee.
Here.
Thank you. There are no agenda modifications. Is there anyone who wants to testify?
Audience communication.
For audience communication? Well, you can kind of see the whole crowd. Did you sign up? Okay. Well, wait for the list so I can call your name, because I have no idea who you are. Thanks. Jesse Lippold, please come to the podium and give your address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If you have any copies of anything you want us to have, you can give it to Christy.
Okay, well, I don't have any copies for you. Although having just been elected to the Salem Keizer School Board, first I'd like to thank you guys for having us here. I'm excited to work with you guys, and I think that we can accomplish a lot if we work as a team. But one thing I did want to address is that as we're going through the budget and the proposed the bond measure, I would also like to keep in mind that we do have 3 new board members joining us shortly. And if we're pushing to rush it to November for the upcoming November election, I understand the need for the rush, and I completely agree with that. Although if we're pushing it for May, if we have that much time, I think if we waited a little bit of extra time so that way our new board members could be a part of the conversation, if they're going to be the ones supporting the bill, I think it's important to have their thoughts and have their ideas implemented as well. And then also, I'd also like to urge the board to keep in mind a lot of what the voters wanted, such as like the seismic and also addressing the classroom size as well, just because that's why we're all here. We're here for them. And so just wanted to get that out to you guys, and thank you for having us.
Thanks. That's all that was on the sign-up. So next on the agenda is action items, and there are none. There's no adoption of the consent calendar. So we're down to the readings. The first one is the potential bond staff recommendation.
All right, so you should have a new board plate that was walked in tonight with a first proposal. And what we are asking you to do tonight is just to take this as a first reading and then to provide some staff direction on, are we close, there's some other things to consider so that we can bring in an even refined recommendation for June 13th. As a reminder, the 3 new board members will be the ones to pass the ballot title. If the staffing recommendation or the recommendation of this board is to wait till May, there are places all along the way to refine the recommendations. So I also hope that if there's, just for new board members to know that this will still be in the works when they're elected, because ultimately they will have to do the ballot title. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wolf.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Perry, Chair McMorris Audix, and members of the board. Tonight, you'll receive a presentation from staff on the proposed general obligation bond, the size and the timing. And tonight's a follow-up from our meeting last Tuesday where you asked staff to develop the proposal for the next general obligation construction bond. And so let's start with the objectives of the evening. So here's the basic outline for the presentation tonight. Quick overview of the long-range facilities planning process, a recap of the task force recommendations, recap of the polling results, the actual proposal itself, and the next steps. So the district began updating its long-range facilities plan in the spring of 2015 with an emphasis on assessing the available capacity at our elementary schools in preparation for offering full-day kindergarten in the fall. And while ORS 195-110 requires a large district to have a current school facility plan, the district's efforts have focused on all buildings and their needs. The major components of the plan are highlighted on the slide, and just as a reminder, the facility needs are based on projected enrollment forecasts over the next 10 and 20-year periods. The board has received several updates throughout the planning process and directed staff to engage a Citizens Facilities Task Force to help complete the requirements of ORS 195-110. The Citizens Task Force was appointed by the superintendent in November 2016. The task force was comprised of 18 citizen stakeholders and key communicators, along with 3 school board members acting as liaisons to the board. The charge of the task force was to review the district's draft long-range facility plan and provide recommendations to the board related to the completion of ORS 195-110, including the district's 10-year capital improvement plan with identified funding options. As you know, Lisa Harnish and Mark Shipman served as co-chairs of the task force, and the task force presented the recommendations in the following areas, as you can see on the slide, totaling $766 million, and identified a general obligation bond as the funding source. These were initial planning estimates, and staff continued to refine through feasibility studies and further analysis regarding the recommendations and refined estimates. And those will be the numbers that I'll be using tonight, and we can talk about that as well. After receiving the task force recommendations, the board directed staff to conduct a bond feasibility study, and the results were presented to the board on May 23rd, last Tuesday. A quick recap of the polling results show support for a bond that is less than $766 million, does not increase property tax levy rates by more than $2.50 per thousand of assessed value, and includes a comprehensive package that addresses overcrowding, career and technical education, science, seismic, safety and security, and protecting the investment in our current facilities. After hearing the presentation on the polling results, the board directed staff to develop a bond proposal that would meet the criteria listed on the slide. So the proposal you have before you tonight is organized differently than the task force recommendations in order to align with the refined staff work that I mentioned earlier. The cost estimates that you will see are based on significant refinement work by staff and industry experts. The estimates are organized in the categories that you see on the slide, and I'll walk you through each of them. But before I do that, I'd like to orient you to the handouts in the packet. You have 3, actually. Table 1 is an overview of the bond proposal by category and cost estimate. Table 2 is an analysis of our elementary schools that addresses capacity, core infrastructure, and seismic needs. You can see which schools would be receiving additional classrooms, gym, cafeteria, or library additions or renovations, and seismic work. And Table 3 is a similar analysis for middle and high schools. I'd also like to orient you a little further. When you look at, if you take a look at Table 2, you'll see if the gym is a renovation project, the scope is either renovation or addition. At this point, and again, we continue to refine the work as we move forward, which is what you do during these processes. It will have either an A or an R. Similarly, cafeterias and libraries, whether it's a renovation or an addition. And then the seismic work We'll get into this in greater detail later in the presentation, but you'll see a seismic design, or it's a very high-risk structure at that location. So let's start with the largest category in the proposal. You can see that $433.5 million includes, you can reference Table 1 as well, includes general education, CTE, and/or science classrooms at 39 schools. It includes a new elementary school, a repurposed elementary school to support early childhood education, a new location for the district's data center, likely at one of the high school additions, so we've been able to integrate a lot of the work that was separated out in the task force recommendations, which helps reduce the cost, and a transportation facility at property owned by the district. The breakdown is as follows. The 39 schools, the data center, and the repurposed elementary school, which allows the district to reduce future lease costs, is approximately $378 million. Only 4 middle schools would receive classroom additions: Houck, Judson, Stevens, and Waldo. That's departure from the task force recommendation, which had recommended that all 10, not Straub, but all 10 of the middle schools receive classroom additions, even though the capacity analysis didn't support that. It was a way to invest more in the middle school level. The new elementary school is approximately $42.2 million. And the transportation center is approximately $13.3. And as I said, tables 2 and 3 provide more detailed information for you as far as what the specific investments would be, whether it be an addition or a renovation. The next category addresses seismic needs. The proposal includes $56 million to address the identified structures that are assessed to be a very high risk of collapse in a Cascadia event or a 9.0 event. The proposal also includes an additional $10 million to strengthen the design standard for immediate reoccupancy for the 21 additions included in the $433.5 million. So all of the additions, 22 additions, are included in the bond, and all of those additions would be designed for immediate reoccupancy. This additional investment would provide safe buildings in each of the feeder systems, including at each of the 6 comprehensive schools where the additions will be. Those 6 are part of the 22. Again, tables 2 and 3 provide you with additional details in the far right columns.
So I'm going to stop. So on table 2, if it has an SD for seismic design, that's a school that's getting an addition, and that addition in this proposal would be constructed to a reoccupancy standard.
That's correct.
Okay.
Safety and security is the next category. You can see how the $33 million investment is broken out by project type. So we would implement card access system upgrade at 46 schools and 16 support sites for approximately $8 million. Intercom system upgrades at 58 schools for approximately $7 million. And office security relocations at 17 schools for $15.5 million. And renovations at an additional 17 schools for a total of 34 schools receiving office security enhancements, either, as I'd said, relocations of the office or renovations to increase sight distance of the front access.
What were the numbers again on the relocates offices and? 17. It was 17 million?
Oh, 33.
The amount of,
So to relocate offices at 17 schools is approximately $15.5 million. And to renovate an additional 17 offices would be approximately $2.5 million.
thank you.
The non-routine maintenance work that will be included in the future, such as roofs, HVAC systems, and flooring, to name a few, So these are expenditures that protect the investments in our current facilities. And as I'd said before, ORS 195-110 only requires you identify the needs of schools. But from the beginning, in the long-range facility planning process, we've focused on all of the needs of all of our buildings. And so you can see that the 54 schools with system replacement or repair would equal 50 million, and the 7 support buildings, 23.5 million. Technology and ADA access, 13.2 million. The technology investment at 9.5 million would expand and enhance wireless networks throughout the district in all buildings. Would include classroom infrastructure upgrades such as moving from ceiling-mounted projectors to wireless projection screens. And cooling and power for network closets in every building throughout the district. And then the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, would help the district focus on outdated restrooms and improve general access in all of our buildings throughout the district.
So I just heard you say, and I just want to make sure I'm correct, the technology aspect would hit every building.
Yes. And so I know that we've moved through this fairly briefly, but I wanted to lay out the various components of the bond proposal. And so, in summary, the bond proposal at approximately $619 million meets the criteria of reducing the overall cost of the bond by approximately $147 million, or 19%. Includes categories that are important to the voters and would increase the projected levy rate less than $1.29 per $1,000 of assessed values. We just received estimates from Piper Jaffray on different amounts, and at a $625 million bond, that rate would be an increase of $1.29. So well below the $1.51, which was the low end of the recommended range of increase that we heard on Tuesday night. And so, here we are with questions and next steps.
Questions? Or were you going to ask the questions?
If there's anything that you would like to see differently in the proposal, that we have more time to work it from now until the 13th, that would be really good information for us.
I just want to clarify something. What I understood in the facilities report was that all of our middle schools needed science classrooms.
Yes.
And now we're having a significant decrease in additional classrooms, but in the column that's just before the seismic, you're talking about either adding or renovating classrooms. So that will provide all of our middle schools with additional science classrooms, because if they're not getting new classrooms, they will have existing classrooms renovated to be science capable, correct?
Yep, that's correct. In fact, let's go to table 3. And you see Houck, Judson, and Stevens with asterisks next to the classroom additions. So let's start with Houck. What that means is Houck needs 2 classrooms, and that 2 includes the number of required science rooms. So the addition of 2 classrooms would be for science at Houck. If you go to if you go to Judson at 7, and then move over to the right in the matrix where you have science room additions or renovations, you see 4 of the 7 would be dedicated to science. And then down at Stevens, 8 additional classrooms, and again, 4 of the 8 would be dedicated to science.
Great, thank you.
Can I follow? Does that mean the remainder of those classrooms are to replace portables that are going to go out of service because they're at the end of their life?
No, in this recommendation, the only additions that would be included in the recommendation are classroom additions at Hauk, which would remove those portables, at Judson, Stevens, and Waldo. Wherever there are portables at the middle school level at the other schools, if they're at the end of their life, they would be replaced with newer portables that are being moved from other locations.
Okay.
So this proposal doesn't get rid of all portables, but it does get rid of all worn-out, end-of-life portables.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chuck?
Mike, in this report or someplace else we've been given, is there a list of what was cut that we could see specifically what was taken away from the 700 and some odd thousand down to the 619?
Yeah, that's a really good point. What I'd say is nothing was cut. This proposal, because it's refined numbers, the 766 helped get us where we are in the process now. These are refined numbers that we can actually implement. And so, for instance, you see in safety and security, all 34 offices get addressed just as in the original proposal. The one difference is not all 10 of the 11 high schools get an addition, as was included in the task force recommendation, only 4.
Middle school.
Middle schools, what'd I say?
High school.
High schools, yeah, all 6 high schools do get the additions. So the 2,200 model build the capacity to 2,200 at 5 of the 6 and 2,000 at West is part of this.
So I'm going to add on that. I think, so the middle schools, not all the middle schools were included. The technology number is less than it was in the original. Is that correct?
We were able to move, we recategorized some of the work, like for instance, the data center was in the original proposal, but
Okay.
that's included in the 433.5 because we'll build that into an addition at one of the high schools. I would say that the only other thing besides the middle school adjustment is that the 95 million for high-risk structures is not included.
I guess what I'm getting at, it would be nice to have a piece of paper that kind of showed this is the 766 million, and this is the 619 million, and these are the categories that have been decreased.
Yeah, oh, certainly we can do that.
And it,
As a board member, if somebody were to ask me, what's the difference between the two, I would have a hard time going through this and being able to articulate it real quickly.
Fair enough. Okay. And again, I think it's really important to understand that the 766 number, that was an initial planning figure and helped us get through the process, helped us understand what the needs were, helped us with the polling. These numbers, I won't be able to crosswalk these numbers back to the 766, but I can say, based on this conversation, we made changes at the middle school level based on the recommendations and changes with the seismic based on the recommendations. Those are really the two
and
major
then
areas.
originally the data center was included, one of the estimates was in a standalone building, and then we incorporated that into the design. And was ADA the other one? Is this a smaller ADA number?
Oh, yes. No, you're right. You're right. Yep. Perfect.
But let's get that back before you, so you can see that.
'Cause I'm assuming we also dropped off administration.
Correct.
A large
Yep.
chunk of
Yep.
administration should have been dropped off of this.
The consolidation.
Selling all the buildings
The
and
consolidation.
consolidating.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was like 49, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've been a little
49.5.
close to this over the weekend, but yeah, we'll go ahead
We're
and
gonna
put the
rewind
list
it,
together. Yeah, I
The
think
other
that would
thing
be
I might
helpful.
suggest, just so everybody's aware, this isn't a complete list of all our schools either. Our brand-new schools aren't on here. We're not doing anything to them. We're not doing anything to Battle Creek. We're not doing anything to Straub. We're not doing anything to Calpuya. Is that correct? And Cesar Chavez?
Well, they'll have non-routine maintenance issues over the next
But we're not doing
10
anything
years.
with regard to, I guess what I would say is, I'd add them to the list of all the elementary schools, because that's not all the feeders for Sprague. That's not all the feeders for West. I'd add them to the list, and even if there's nothing going on there, that's because it's a new building. We don't need to do anything there. And I think that's important for the taxpayer and for the voters and for folks in the community to know. We're looking at all of our facilities. I mean, all those buildings are in our long-term facility plan. We have to have those in our long-term facility plan. Even though they're brand new, I would suggest we list them.
Okay.
And I keep jumping in front of Paul. Sorry, Paul.
That's okay, you're fine. Nancy hasn't recognized me yet.
You were hiding behind Chris.
I don't think so.
Paul?
All right, I would like to say, Mike, thank you for this. Because as we talked earlier today, and I did spend a lot of time with this as well, and these are very nice numbers. I want to say, as having been part of the task force, the getting the building, under the seismic, getting the buildings ready for reoccupancy, that was never on the table, and that's nice to see, even at the lower rate. That's great. Thank you for looking at that. And the other one was, I wanted to say thank you for, under the high schools, adding Roberts. Because I know in the earlier, under the task force, when we looked at it, Roberts wasn't there.
Yes.
So I want to say thank you for making sure that was there.
Thank you. Yep.
I don't see any other hands.
Okay, then. So let me recap, then. A list of the work that was included in the task force recommendations, but isn't or reduced in this one. Is that right? I'm a little fuzzy on the list of all the schools.
Every school.
Where you've got table
Yeah.
1 or 2, where you've got table 2, and you've got all the elementary feeders to the schools,
Right,
you don't list all the schools. You just list the ones we're doing work at.
because they're included in the bond.
Right.
But you want a more comprehensive
Yeah,
list, is what I'm
List of
hearing.
everything to show the fact that we have more schools.
You can even make it a separate square, schools we're not planning to do work at, but
Okay.
if people see this, they're gonna go, well, that's the only schools they're saying they've got. I think it's just nice
Yeah.
to let folks
Right.
know, we have done repair and renovation to a number of schools out of that 2008 bond, and because of the generosity of our taxpayers, we don't need to do some of that anymore.
Okay, sure.
And it might be good to signify that those schools are schools that have been assessed and are not in need of additions or any of the repairs that we're talking about.
Yeah, for,
Infrastructure.
these tables get really big really fast. So the attempt here was to show you, based on capacity, core infrastructure, and seismic. We can certainly put one together for non-routine maintenance as well, so that you can see that.
Well, I think we'd have to if we were gonna do a campaign with the community anyway. We've gotta show them what we're gonna do.
Okay.
I mean, the bond title will be limited, but there's gonna be more work that goes on beyond what's in that bond title. And I think it's important if people are gonna raise their taxes, they wanna know exactly what they're gonna get for it.
Okay,
Rick?
I'll wait till he's done writing his notes.
all right, thanks.
Don't want to confuse him with a new question. Ready? I want to talk about the last number you talked about, the 1.29 for a $619 million bond. You know, that's a significant drop. Can you give us a little more on, because property values are a lot more than we thought originally, that we can, I mean, original estimate for a $766 million bond was $3. Dropped to 1.29 and only 619, something's different in the calculation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Part of what we, again, when you're early in the process, you're using initial planning figures and assumptions, and which is why we had the numbers run again. And so some of the initial planning assumptions were, what would, over a 20-year period, what would you estimate your assessed value growth rate to be? And so the initial estimates were very conservative at 3% for the first 4 years and 2.75 for the remaining 26. And so we had our consultants, Piper Jaffray, update those assumptions for this run, and we bumped it up to 3.5 for the first 4 years and 3 for the remaining 16. I'm sorry, it's a 20-year bond. And so that gives us, and it gives us a different look. Basically, what it does is give you a higher amount for a less of a levy rate increase. And so that really are the two major assumptions that changed in the projection.
Why do you feel comfortable about that projection? Why change off the projection?
Because the other one, the lower rate, took into account the Great Recession and where we had almost no assumed assessed value growth. And so we're beyond that, and the projections for the future show it to be, we build our budget at 3.75%. So even at 3.5% growth, it's still a conservative number. So in other words, we're beyond the Great Recession, and the real estate market is picking up in Salem and Keizer communities.
Rick?
So what I'm interested in is the difference between the bottom end of the range from the poll, $1.51 and $1.29. What would that 22 cents buy us in millions of dollars over the life of the bond? In other words, what if it got us another 20 million or whatever, what could we add back of the things we decided we may not do at this price tag? You understand
Yeah.
what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. And one of the major areas that we reduced was seismic.
Right.
I mean, we took the 95 million out. Now, we added 10 back in for the enhanced design, but still, there's 95 million from the recommendations that's not in there. And so part of what we were doing in this proposal is being mindful of reducing the total amount. And so just as a planning assumption, I used a reduction between 15 and 20% that seemed reasonable. And so at 619 or 620, that's a 19% reduction. Now that gives, obviously gives you, the board, options to consider. But again, we did have pretty strong polling results that said we needed to be cost conscious and be mindful as we move forward. So
We could, though, between now and the 13th, or the next time the board hears this, we could not only give the list of what isn't included, but also here's what the amount would be to get to $1.51, and here's what our recommendations would be to consider to get it to the, or at least things on the list that could be considered. That's what you're asking for, to come
Yeah,
back
that's what
with
I'm
that.
asking for. Because my impression from the results was that, the polling results was that the big price tag was maybe more objectionable than being at $1.51. So if we could go somewhere in between at $1.51, we might decide we want to do that. So it'd be worth having that information for the discussion in 2 weeks.
okay, we can bring that in the full report from Piper Jaffray if you'd like to
Okay.
see the charts and the different rates that get you from basically 600 million to 700 million as a top end.
Okay, that'd be good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Jim?
So Mike, remind me where we're at currently on our amount per thousand of assessed value on our general obligation bonds?
We're right at, for 2017, it's $1.35. It fluctuates, but we're projected to be back up to $1.50 in 2018, and then we stay that way through 2019, 2020, and then it reduces 2021 down to about $1.15. So there clearly is room for the levy rate increase.
Yeah, I guess, I don't mean to be a dour person here, but I think we're asking for too much even in this proposal, to be honest with you. When we passed the bond here back in 2006, was it? 2007?
2008.
I mean, we were at a point where we had refinanced a bond, one was paid off, and we asked the voters for then the largest general obligation bond in the state's history. And sure, there's been bigger ones in Portland and Beaverton, but they also have property value that we don't have. I mean, our largest properties in this city do not pay us taxes, i.e. the state buildings. I think we're still asking our voters for a lot before I'd be willing to put out a ballot measure that had it at this level. I'd want to see some additional polling data. Now that we've dropped some things off, I'd want to see what the poll actually says. Because one of the things that they said in the poll was seismic's important. Even if it's very high risk or extreme high risk, it was important to voters. And we just lopped off 95 million of that could be important to voters. Now, whether in fact we need it in our buildings or not is an assessment that we need to make. But I still think asking voters in Salem and Keizer, Polk, and Marion counties to go that high is a big reach. It's a lot of money. When you take a look at our overall annual income that was in the polling data and in Jeannie's report, Jeannie Magmer's report, compared to Portland and Beaverton, our incomes aren't there and our house values aren't there. So we need to be careful at what tipping point we do. I guess one of the things I'd like to see is this board working with our facility task force and our new board members coming on, taking a look at what we'd really like to see and poll our voters on that so that we know exactly where we're going, because you have very few shots at getting a measure like this passed. And I want to make sure we have the best shot to assure the work we need to do to our facilities. And trust me, I've been in our facilities. We need to get rid of those portables. We need to add science labs to our high schools and to our middle schools. And we won't meet the PE mandate currently with our middle school gymnasium alignment. We just won't. So I know there's work that needs to be done. I think we need to do a little bit better case of building that with our public. I'm not saying I'm a no. I'm saying we need to figure out truly what it is we want to put on a list of what needs to be approved minimally for this school district, talk to our voters about it, and I think we need to respect the work of the facility task force and loop them back into it as well. That was one of the reasons at the last meeting I said, you know, we're probably looking, we got to be looking at May. We can't put a campaign like this together in November, and we need to honor the work of that facility task force, plus check with our voters and see where we're at. Mike, I appreciate all the work you did on this. I'm not saying we can't get there. I'm just saying it's still going to be a big property tax bill to these voters in this community. They're not used to that, and we don't know what else is out there. What other entities are going to go for what. We just had our police bond pass at a second time around at a lower value. That added property taxes to tax rolls, so I think we need to take a look at that a little bit more. Trust me, I get it. We need to do the work. We need to do $766 million of work, probably actually more than that, if we really truly wanted the facilities that provide an excellent learning capacity for our students. But I think we also need to be mindful of what our taxpayers are willing to carry as a burden for us. Because we're asking them to pass essentially doubling their tax rate, essentially. I mean, they're going to go up to 277 to 279, somewhere in that range per thousand, where they're currently at $1.35. I mean, that's a hit, and we need to acknowledge that and respect what our voters tell us.
So after that, I'm going to ask for a little bit of consensus on where, because I've heard Rick say, give us the distance between that and $1.51. I've heard Jim say, let's reduce it, or let's loop back in the facilities task force and additional polling. So give us a sense of what the group would like. None of them wrong directions, but.
I like what Mike presented. I'm willing to stay with this.
You know, we haven't really talked about whether doing this bond measure in November or May. And is this a separate conversation from what you're asking us to do?
I think Mike put it on the slide as May 2018 is our recommendation, but didn't say it out loud.
Yeah, I saw that. And I read it.
I meant to. It's
meant to.
It's May 2018,
Yeah,
for a number of reasons, not the least of which is more time to refine the work and engage the community, which the polling has already said they're willing to pay.
and, you know, I respect what Jim says as far as the need to probably do a little bit more refining on it. But I guess I'm not convinced that we should wait till May. And I'm probably, you know, the only one out here in the crowd who's saying maybe we should be looking at November. But before we make that decision to go in May, I'm just wondering, have we talked to the chamber, the community colleges, the fire districts, the city, to find out what's going to be on the ballot and when, and is that a factor? I know that the political climate right now is a lot different than it was in May of 2016 to 2017. You wait till 2018, how valid is our polling going to be over the year? How many issues and problems could come up over the next year that is going to make this more difficult? Maybe easier, I don't know. But I guess I just want to throw that out there, is that this is one board member who has not made up his mind whether to wait until to May of 2018 is the best way to go. I realize it's a short amount of time, but right now, home values are at a higher level than they've been in a long time. Who knows where they're going to be a year from now, and there's just a lot of factors in waiting a full year. So I just throw that out there.
Okay.
Comment?
Well, I think we need to bring forward the information we've requested so far. I mean, we may still not go any further, as Jim has talked about, but bringing forward the information we requested will help with the discussion in 2 weeks, because if we do decide in 2 weeks, we do want to go in November, well, some of this stuff we're going to want to look at now, too.
Correct.
So we don't have Chris and Marty here, so it's a little hard to get a good idea of what people want to do.
And I guess I'd like to go back to, we know what's happening on the ballot in November of 2017 and May of 2018. Have we done any
I
research
have
on that?
just a little bit of research, and I believe the city with the seismic library and is in November. I think there might be something out there with the transit district, but I have not. Chemeketa is not looking at anything. I need to make a call to Marion and Polk to see where they are.
And I know that Keizer doesn't have any ballot measures on the horizon as well. As Superintendent Perry said, the one that we're pretty sure of is the city, and we believe that the number that we heard was around 45 million.
So it sounds to me like you have a list of things that we need to have back on the 13th, and we'll have a discussion at that point. We should have a full board. Marty will be on the phone, I believe, but she'll be available.
I did have a conversation with Marty, and I said that I would relay some of her thoughts during the conversation that we had, which is there may be different ways to add resources into this to address the seismic needs, rather than considering an all or nothing with the 95 million and the high-risk structures. Like, for instance, we just adding the 10 million to increase the design standard to immediate reoccupancy is an approach that staff could provide you with recommendations on how to increase the safety in some of our schools, if not all of them, in a different way than the 95 million that was identified early in this planning process.
Mike, does that seismic number include any of the grants from the state? You're not anticipating those?
No, we have many more seismic needs, but no, and the most that we would receive from any of those is 1.5 million.
Right.
And so we have 151 million of identified seismic needs. So obviously the way to meet them is through the bond.
And we're probably not on the list for a $4 million match from the state either.
Not for November, and that's another consideration. If the board chooses to go in November, we would have to put that application in July.
Right.
The board goes in May, which is the recommendation, staff recommendation. We'd have more time, but we'd still have to meet a timeline to
I
submit
mean,
that application.
4 million's not that much when you're looking at a $600 million bond, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we would continue to apply for all
Sure.
of the seismic. The last round, we applied for 3 and received one.
Right.
I'm drawing a blank on which school now, but
Yeah.
and all three of them were.
That was Highland, wasn't it? Did we get it for Highland?
Highland we already did. We were awarded for
That's
think-
okay.
I think it was Richmond.
Richmond.
okay.
No.
Yeah.
So-
Oh, okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. So the next reading is revisions to board policy, which are behind your agenda. And I'll turn it over to Christy to get us through these.
So I'll just walk you through them very quickly. Many of these are related to the work you did with the equity lens. So if you look at the first one, which is not related to the equity work, BSL 1, we still have chief of staff in here, so I changed it to assistant superintendent. So that was an edit. BG 2, board job description. We identified the word citizens as a, we identified citizens as a word that should be changed throughout our board policy. So this is reflected tonight. We did a search on the word citizens to find all of them. So we changed it in this case to community and community members. The next one is results 1. We changed the word citizen to community. The next one, board operations, there is the word citizens, but the official legal word for a budget committee member is an elector. So we chose the legal language rather than the word citizen. And that is also reflected on BG 11. Elector is defined by ORS 247.002. Next, we have BG 1, which you actually saw these changes in your work session when we were working on equity. And we tied in the equity lens work, and we also changed the citizens to community. Next, we have changed the title of EA 3 to be community instead of citizens. And then EL 3, we also took an opportunity to suggest some language that was kind of highlighted through that equity lens discussion. I think this was Chris and Patrick and Cynthia's work, but Patrick took a stab at this for us to provide some different language. So I'd like you to take a really close look at this one before next time to see, does this reflect the language you would want in that? The next section is I took an opportunity to write a preface to our board policy to describe policy governance. And then the last paragraph in that, I added a statement that demonstrates your commitment to equity and the hard work of equity. And I thought that was really important to put up front in the policy manual. Next, in the results section of the policy book, we will have R1 as a governing statement. I made a new R2 that is at your actual equity lens, even though we have a nice way of visually portraying the equity lens. I thought it good to put it into policy. So we have a new R2 in policy, which is the equity lens, which you've already adopted. It's just putting it in the policy manual. And then lastly, I took a stab at some new language for R3, which is the results policy. And I'll just walk you through what I did. I heard a lot from you about well-rounded education, and to be sure that we were looking for well-rounded education. And this was actually some thinking from Nancy around our diploma requirements really require a well-rounded education. So I put that into the language to demonstrate your commitment to that. And then I've added a new 4, 5, and 6, which was something I believe I indicated to you that I would add as a result of looking at our results policy this next year. Because as you know, the state assessment system often changes, it seems like. So one of the things I am committed to do, and I think this is the place to demonstrate that commitment, is number 4, develop a data system that will allow the board to monitor the district's progress towards increasing the graduation rate and lowering the dropout rate. I have not indicated everything that will be in that, because it's the development of the system. Number 5 is around developing a system of annual reports around, to include metrics on dropout prevention, chronic non-absenteeism. And then also, number 6 is establish routines in schools to demonstrate that we are regularly monitoring the individual school performance. One of the things I would like us to see, to really be able to demonstrate to you, is that we know when we have a school that isn't performing the way we want them to do, and that we identify that before the state identifies that for us, so that we have regular routines around that. So that was my attempt at putting some of that data work into the results policy. I don't know that I've gotten any of it perfect yet, but I wanted to get it as a first draft for discussion.
Questions?
Good job.
In that first paragraph under academic achievement, I think I would like to see us just list out the different categories that are included in the diploma, that students need credits in English, math, social science, science, elective, health, PE. I've looked them all up. All of the diplomas, the Oregon diploma, the modified diploma, and the extended diploma all require that you have credits in a variety of things that I think just being more intentional at saying that our graduates have demonstrated competence in a variety of subjects, not just the tested subjects, I think is important. So I'd like to see that language added if people would be okay with that. Bringing that
Makes sense to
bringing
me.
that back.
Would you also want to include the number of credits required for graduation?
We could. I think that it would need to be upgraded anytime they change, but that's a reasonable thing to do. But because there are 3 different levels of diploma, the Oregon diploma, the modified diploma, and the extended diploma, they all have different amounts, but we could signify those things, English, this many for the Oregon, this many for the modified, this many for the extended, I think would do it. Any other, Rick?
Yeah, Christie, on the equity lens, R2, did you take a look and see whether that would fit in board governance instead of
Okay.
here? Because the results policy's been more the direction we've given you for results, not direction we've given ourselves.
Okay.
And this statement is reminding the board that we have an equity lens and we're going to use it. I mean, that's the way I read it, at least, so.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Anything else? Paul?
I just want to clarify something in my head. All of these reports, the annual goals will be given back to the board, so we'll see them in some way, in some report. Although I don't see that specified here, I see them being, systems being developed, but I don't see where there's a reporting function back.
Yeah.
Except it's touched on a little bit in 6, but that's a very specific to how a school is progressing, not how these other items are progressing.
So this might not be clear enough, but number 5 was an attempt to do that, a system of
Right.
annual reports
But
to the
it's-
board.
To the board, yes, because nowhere else does it say to the board.
So we should add to the board in
5.
In
and-
5. Definitely.
And then in 6, it would be routines to demonstrate to the board,
To the board.
regular monitoring, and in 4,
And maybe this isn't the correct order for these either.
no, I know, but
Yeah.
but I think that will allow the board, well, there it says allow the board to monitor, so then that one's okay. So, that was my concern.
Jim?
So this is going to come back for a final reading on the 13th.
Correct.
If we have any comments, because I don't want to sit here and wordsmith tonight, if we have any comments, when would you need them by, Madam Chair?
Today is Tuesday. We have,
By like next Tuesday?
we have board agenda planning on Tuesday, so I would think by next Tuesday.
Okay, if I have
Yeah,
any. I
that'd be
just-
great.
I mean, it's just a first quick read here. If I've got any, I can get them to you by Tuesday.
Yep.
Looks like no other comments. It looks to me like we're to the end of the agenda, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.